So I want you to just imagine a single person who is essentially responsible for the fact that nearly half of the world's population is alive today.
Yeah, just kind of sit with the sheer scale of that for a second.
Right. Billions of people living, breathing, just going about their daily lives entirely because of a specific scientific breakthrough made by one guy.
Exactly. But now, imagine that exact same person is universally remembered by history as the father of chemical warfare.
Yeah.
A man whose research, indirectly laid the darkest possible groundwork for the Holocaust.
It's honestly the ultimate historical paradox. Welcome to today's deep dive, everyone. We are looking at just a terrifying duality today.
We really are. We're examining how one single, undeniably brilliant mind can simultaneously produce, the greatest life-giving technology in human history, and then also the most horrific instruments of death.
It forces you to really look at the boundaries of human invention. Like, what happens when the pursuit of scientific progress becomes entirely, completely unmoored from human consequence?
And this isn't just abstract history. Like, look at whatever you ate for lunch today.
Or dinner, or whatever snack you're having right now while listening.
Exactly. Because without the chemist Fritz Haber, half the food on that plate literally wouldn't exist.
It's wild to think about.
There would simply not be enough nitrogen in the soil of the earth to grow it. You carry his legacy in the very cells of your body right now.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to understand how he changed the literal composition of our world, we have to rewind, right?
Yeah, we have to go back to 1868.
Right. To a city called Breslau, which was then part of the Kingdom of Prussia. It's now Wrocław in modern-day Poland.
And Haber was born into a pretty wealthy Jewish family.
His father, Siegfried Haber, was this highly successful merchant, right? He dealt in dye pigments, paints, pharmaceuticals, things like that.
He did. But the defining tragedy of Haber's life strikes almost immediately.
Yeah, it's so sad.
Within 3 weeks of Fritz's birth, his mother, Paula, actually passes away from complications related to the pregnancy.
Oh, wow.
And that loss just leaves Siegfried completely devastated. And it instantly forms this profound, really deep chasm between father and son.
Because he blames him.
Exactly. Siegfried essentially internalized the idea that young Fritz was the reason Paula was dead.
And you really see that play out, Even when Fritz is left in the care of various aunts initially, that lack of paternal warmth sets a massive foundation for his life.
Yeah, and when Fritz is about 6, Siegfried remarries. He marries a woman named Hedwig Hamburger, and they end up having 3 daughters.
Right, and Siegfried shows immense love and care for his daughters, but Fritz he's kept at arm's length constantly.
He is. He develops a really close relationship with his stepmother and his half-sisters, which is good. But the patriarch of the family, the one whose approval he obviously craves the most, just remains this cold, unyielding wall.
The psychological foundation being poured here is so critical to understand the rest of his life.
Oh, absolutely. We're looking at a lifelong pattern. Haber is desperately trying to prove his worth, to prove his usefulness to a dominant patriarchal figure.
First, it's his literal father.
Right. And later in life, he basically transfers that exact same desperate need for approval to the German state itself. He spends his entire life trying to be the perfect, indispensable son.
I mean, to be frank to Siegfried, looking at it like a Greek tragedy, he clearly had the capacity to love. He loved his daughters. But looking at Fritz was probably like looking at the living, breathing receipt for his first wife's life.
That's a good way to put it.
It wasn't necessarily active malice, It was just this unresolved grief manifesting as incredibly damaging parenting.
Yeah, and the breaking point of all this comes when Fritz actually tried to join his father's business.
Right, because he goes off, earns his PhD in chemistry, and you'd think, okay, that would have earned some respect from his dad.
You would think.
Yeah.
But instead, Siegfried forces him to take handwriting courses.
Wait, handwriting courses?
Yeah, and he wants him to become a salesman. He didn't care at all about the academic achievement. He just wanted a merchant.
Which leads to this completely fascinating disaster involving a cholera epidemic.
Oh, yeah. So Fritz is back home. He's trying to prove his worth in the family business. And a cholera outbreak threatens the region.
So Fritz uses his chemical knowledge. He convinces his father to purchase a staggering stockpile of calcium hypochlorite.
Right, because at the time, the scientific understanding of epidemiology was, still evolving. But calcium hypochlorite was known as a really potent disinfectant.
Let's actually break down why he thought that was a good idea, chemically speaking. Because calcium hypochlorite, when it reacts with water, it releases chlorine,
Exactly.
which is incredibly effective at oxidizing and destroying the cell walls of bacteria, like the exact kind that cause cholera.
Right, so Fritz thought he was making this brilliant strategic business move by basically cornering the market on the cure.
But the problem is twofold.
Yeah. First, the epidemic ends up being completely isolated. It never actually sweeps through their region like everyone feared.
So the demand never materializes. Nobody needs the disinfectant.
Exactly. And second, and this is far more critical chemically, calcium hypochlorite is highly unstable.
Right. It's not a compound you can just pack away in a warehouse for a rainy day.
No, not at all. It absorbs moisture from the air, and it undergoes this slow decomposition. It literally loses its active chlorine content over time.
So Siegfried is just sitting on a literal mountain of a chemical that is degrading into useless dust.
Yes, losing money by the day.
It is an absolute catastrophe. Siegfried throws their incompatibility right in Fritz's face. He tells him he categorically does not belong in the business world.
He says, just go back to your university studies. He essentially banishes him to academia.
And that profound rejection just pushes Haber entirely away from the world of commerce. Like, if he can't find an identity as Siegfried's successor, he decides he is going to forge a completely new identity for himself in the laboratory.
Yeah, he immerses himself deeply. He studies under some really notable figures like Robert Bunsen.
Like the Bunsen burner.
Exactly, the namesake the Bunsen burner. But as he's grinding through these academic ranks, he makes a highly calculated decision.
This is where it gets really interesting.
Between 1892 and 1894, while he's working as an assistant in Jena, Haber converts from Judaism to Lutheranism.
Right. Now, his family back in Breslau had been largely assimilated. The Edict of 1812 had allowed Jews in Prussia to be treated as local citizens.
Yeah, and the Habers weren't strictly observant of synagogue traditions, though they definitely supported the community. Haber always identified strongly as German.
Right, but what's fascinating here is the cultural context of 19th century Prussia, the Kaiserreich, right?
It is essential to understand this. While Jews were legally citizens, there was a very real, very heavy glass ceiling.
Oh, totally. If you wanted to reach the highest tiers of the university system, like becoming a full professor.
Or if you wanted to gain an officer's commission in the military.
Right. Being Jewish was an almost insurmountable barrier. Anti-Semitism was fully institutionalized.
And Haber didn't just want to be a scientist. He wanted to be a prominent, influential German scientist.
He's basically hacking the social hierarchy of the 1890s.
He really is.
He's shedding his heritage like an old coat just to get a seat at the table. He knows the rules of the game, and he decides to play it so he can advance.
And once he secures that footing, his academic climb at the University of Karlsruhe is staggering. I mean, he dives into rigorous studies of dye technology, electrochemistry, and specifically the thermal decomposition of hydrocarbons.
Okay, let's unpack that term for a second. Thermal decomposition of hydrocarbons. Because it sounds like dense textbook jargon, but it's actually the exact skill that sets him up for his world-changing discovery.
Right. Thermal decomposition is essentially the process of breaking down complex chemical substances by applying intense heat.
So he was learning exactly how molecules behave, how bonds weaken or break when you push them to extreme temperatures.
Exactly. He is building a mental toolkit of how to manipulate gases and hydrocarbons using heat and pressure.
He publishes heavily, right?
Yeah.
He writes a book on the thermodynamics of technical gas reactions.
Which was hailed as a model of accuracy at the time. He just shows this brilliant, really obsessive mind that's capable of synthesizing completely different scientific disciplines.
And with that toolkit, Haber sets his sights on solving an existential threat that is literally terrifying the globe at this point.
Yeah, the global food supply at the turn of the 20th century was hitting a mathematical wall.
The world relied entirely on natural deposits of sodium nitrate to use as fertilizer. And without nitrogen, crops simply cannot yield enough to feed a rapidly growing population.
Because nitrogen is a core component of amino acids, right?
Right.
The building blocks of plant proteins.
Exactly. No nitrogen, no food. Period.
And at that time, the primary source of this fertilizer was natural deposits. It was heavily concentrated in South America, mostly mined in Chile.
Right. They were shipping millions of tons of mineral deposits and literally bird guano across the ocean just to keep European and American crops growing.
But the terrifying reality was that those natural deposits were finite. The population was booming, the land was exhausted, and starvation on a truly global scale was looming within decades.
And the cruel irony of all this is that the solution was literally floating all around them.
It's so crazy to think about.
The Earth's atmosphere is roughly 78% nitrogen gas. We are breathing it right now.
But the problem is, atmospheric nitrogen is completely useless to plants.
Right. The goal for chemists worldwide was to figure out how to synthesize ammonia, which is a compound of nitrogen and hydrogen directly from the air.
So that it could be turned into a liquid or solid fertilizer that plant roots could actually absorb.
But doing that is incredibly difficult.
Yeah, because nitrogen gas consists of two nitrogen atoms locked together by a triple covalent bond.
Meaning they share 3 pairs of electrons.
Exactly. It is one of the strongest chemical bonds in nature. That triple bond makes atmospheric nitrogen incredibly stable and stubbornly unreactive.
Like, in nature, it takes the immense energy of a literal lightning strike, or the really slow, specialized work of certain bacteria in the soil to break those atoms apart. Imagine nitrogen is a perfectly happy couple locked in a tight embrace or like a titanium vault completely rusted shut.
Right.
The two atoms are locked inside together and they do not want to be separated.
And scientists have been trying to pry this vault open for years. But the energy costs to force the reaction were just way too high.
You'd spend more energy breaking the bond than you'd ever get back in agricultural value.
But this is where Haber's expertise in the thermodynamics of gas reactions literally changes human history.
Right. In 1909, he realizes that he can apply Le Chatelier's principle.
Which is a chemical principle, stating that if you change the conditions of a system in equilibrium, like, say, drastically changing the pressure or temperature, the system will shift to counteract that change.
So Haber theorized that if he used immense pressure, he could essentially force the nitrogen and hydrogen to combine.
Brute force.
Pure brute force. He literally built a chemical pressure cooker to forcefully rip them apart and pair them off with hydrogen.
He subjects the gases to 500 degrees Celsius and an immense pressure of 2,900 pounds per square inch.
But even that isn't enough on its own, right? He needs a catalyst.
Yes, the catalyst is the key. Originally, he used rare metals like uranium and osmium.
So if the heat and pressure are the brute force trying to rip the titanium vault open, the catalyst is the chemical lubricant.
That's a perfect analogy. It lowers the activation energy required. The nitrogen molecules bind to the surface of the catalyst, which weakens that stubborn triple bond just enough for the hydrogen atoms to slip in and react, forming ammonia.
He literally pulled bread out of thin air.
He really did. But Haber's apparatus was, it was delicate. It only produced tiny little drops of ammonia in a laboratory setting.
Right. It was a proof of concept. A scientific miracle, sure, but it wasn't yet feeding the world.
Right. And that is where Carl Bosch enters the story.
Bosch was an incredibly talented chemist and engineer at the German chemical company BASF. Yeah, and Bosch specialized in pressure chemistry. He takes Haber's tabletop apparatus and is tasked with scaling it up to massive industrial levels.
Which was an absolute engineering nightmare at the time.
Oh, completely. The intense pressure and the hydrogen gas actually caused something called hydrogen embrittlement in the steel pipes.
It was making them shatter like glass, right?
Exactly. Bosch had to design these dual-chambered pipes with soft iron linings just to survive the process.
And he also replaced the rare, really expensive osmium catalyst with the highly refined, cheap iron catalyst.
So this partnership creates the Haber-Bosch process. And by successfully commercializing this, they absolutely shattered the natural limits of human population growth.
It's hard to overstate. Synthetic fertilizers allowed farmers to produce dramatically better, healthier crops at much faster speeds.
It meant you could grow vastly more food on the exact same plot of land.
And Haber wins the 1918 Nobel Prize in Chemistry for this breakthrough, right? Though he didn't actually receive it until 1919 due to the war.
Right. But while he is receiving this global acclaim, the ripple effects are immense. Every miracle has a price tag.
So what does this all mean? Let's look at the economic fallout first.
Yeah, Chile's economy collapses.
Because their entire economy was built around exporting those natural sodium nitrate deposits.
Exactly. After the Haber-Bosch process became widespread, the need for naturally extracted nitrate just plummeted.
Production in Chile fell from 2.5 million tons in 1925 down to just 800,000 tons by 1934. The price completely cratered.
Tens of thousands of Chilean miners and workers lost their jobs. It led to severe economic depression and political instability in the whole region.
And then there is the environmental fallout.
Right, because synthetic fertilizers are so cheap and abundant now, they are routinely over-applied to crops,
The plants can only absorb so much nitrogen, the rest just washes away in the rain,
causing severe nitrogen runoff into local rivers, lakes, and oceans.
which triggers explosive algae blooms. The excess nitrogen acts as this, like, superfood for algae, which multiply rapidly, covering the surface of the water.
And when that algae eventually dies and decomposes, the bacteria feeding on it consume all the dissolved oxygen in the water.
It creates dead zones, it completely suffocates local fish populations, and destroys aquatic ecosystems.
And it's a crisis we are still aggressively fighting today.
It's the ultimate butterfly effect. A guy in a German lab turns a valve, and a decade later, a miner in Chile is out of work, and a lake halfway across the world suffocates from algae.
It's wild. But, it is worth looking at Haber's own Nobel acceptance speech in the context of all these unintended consequences.
Yeah, you might expect sheer hubris from a man who conquered the atmosphere.
But he actually showed a surprising moment of humility. He noted that the nitrogen-fixing bacteria in the soil, the natural organisms that do this work, still use methods far more sophisticated than his own high-pressure steel tanks.
He admitted that nature understands the chemistry of living matter in ways human engineering cannot yet imitate.
It was a rare moment of awe for the natural world he had just conquered.
But the most terrifying pivot in our story isn't about economics or the environment. It's about war.
Yeah. The Haber-Bosch process didn't just make fertilizer to grow food.
No. The exact same synthetic ammonia produced by this process is the foundational precursor for making nitric acid,
Which is the core ingredient required to manufacture high explosives like TNT.
This introduces the concept of dual-use technology. A tool that can create life can just as easily be engineered to destroy it.
And as World War I dawns, Germany finds itself in a strategic nightmare.
Right, because the British Royal Navy immediately blockades German ports. They completely cut them off from the Chilean nitrate imports they needed to make gunpowder and artillery shells.
Without the Haber-Bosch process, Germany's munition stockpiles would have run dry within the first year of the war.
They would have been forced to surrender simply because they couldn't shoot back.
But because of Haber and Bosch, they could pull the ingredients for their explosives directly out of the air.
And Haber's focus rapidly, and actually eagerly, shifts from feeding lives to taking them.
He greets the outbreak of World War I with immense, almost fanatic enthusiasm.
He wants to serve his country, right? He wants to prove his loyalty.
Exactly. He joins 92 other prominent German intellectuals in signing the Manifesto of the 93.
Which was a proclamation that completely threw their support behind the German military actions and really galvanized the public.
He is a staunch, unapologetic patriot, and he decides to leverage his chemical expertise to break the gruesome deadlock of trench warfare.
Because trench warfare was a literal meat grinder. Millions of men dug into the mud, unable to advance because of machine guns and barbed wire.
Traditional artillery shells were failing to break the stalemate. I mean, you could just hide from shrapnel in a deep dugout.
So Haber realizes that to clear a trench, you need a weapon that acts like a fluid, something that sinks into the earth.
And he turns to chlorine gas.
But the legal and ethical barriers were immediate, right?
Oh, yeah. The Hague Convention of 1907, which Germany had signed, explicitly banned the use of projectiles whose sole object is the diffusion of asphyxiating or deleterious gases.
So Haber circumvents international law with a technicality.
He pioneers the non-ballistic release of deadly gases.
Meaning, instead of firing them in artillery shells, which was banned, he designs a system to release heavier-than-air chlorine gas from thousands of pressurized cylinders placed right on the front lines.
Right. The strategy just relied on waiting for a favorable wind to physically carry the toxic cloud across no man's land into the enemy trenches.
And he isn't just sitting behind a mahogany desk in Berlin drafting these plans either.
No, not at all. During the Second Battle of Ypres in Belgium in the spring of 1915, Haber is physically on the front lines.
He assembles a special military unit for gas warfare, a team of over 150 scientists and 1,300 technical personnel.
Which actually included future Nobel laureates like Otto Hahn.
Crazy. Haber is right there in the mud overseeing the opening of the valves.
And the physiological effect of chlorine gas is horrific.
Right, because when inhaled, chlorine gas reacts with the moisture in the respiratory tract and the lungs to form hydrochloric acid.
It effectively destroys the alveoli, the tiny air sacs responsible for oxygen exchange.
The victim's lungs begin to secrete massive amounts of fluid to protect the tissue.
Meaning the soldiers effectively drown in their own bodily fluids from the inside out.
It's awful. And the gas sank perfectly into the Allied trenches. The French and Algerian troops had no gas masks. They had absolutely no idea what was hitting them.
The line broke, causing agonizing casualties.
And for this terrifying success, Haber is promoted to the rank of captain by the Kaiser.
And the significance of that promotion cannot be overstated.
Right, because as a young Jewish man doing his compulsory military service decades earlier, he had been firmly denied an officer's rank because of his heritage.
Now, having converted to Christianity and delivered a devastating weapon, he finally receives the military validation he spent his entire life craving.
And he approaches the horrific effects of the gas with the cold, calculating mind of a scientist.
He formulates a mathematical equation that becomes known as Haber's rule.
The equation is C times T equals K, where C is the concentration of the gas, T is the amount of time the person is exposed, and K is a constant representing the toxic effect or, death.
The physiological mechanism behind Haber's rule is crucial to military strategy.
How so?
Well, he realized that the human body's detoxification and repair mechanisms can be overwhelmed not just by a sudden massive dose of poison, but by a very low concentration inhaled over a long period.
The body simply fails to clear the toxin fast enough.
Right. This meant armies didn't necessarily need to drop a dense cloud all at once. They could blanket an area with low-level gas for hours, ensuring the trenches became lethal over time as the soldiers slowly accumulated the fatal dose.
He reduced human suffering to a sterile math equation. It's like an accountant balancing a ledger, but the currency is suffocation.
It really is. And to justify his work, Haber fiercely defended himself against accusations of inhumanity.
He famously stated, "During peacetime, a scientist belongs to the world, but during wartime, he belongs to his country."
He even argued that gas warfare was not inherently more cruel than flying pieces of hot iron shrapnel.
He claimed it was more humane because it didn't cause the physical mutilations, the lost limbs that conventional artillery did.
He was heavily criticized by many of his contemporaries, though.
Oh, yeah. The physicist Albert Einstein, who was a pacifist and actually a friend of Haber's, was completely appalled by his involvement in chemical weapons.
The ethical dilemma facing chemists at that time was profound. And Haber consciously chose his nation over abstract scientific neutrality.
But that fierce commitment to the German war effort created an unbearable fracture inside his own home.
Haber was married to Clara Immerwahr, and her story is deeply, deeply heartbreaking.
Clara was phenomenal. She was the very first woman to ever earn a PhD in chemistry at the University of Breslau.
Her thesis was a brilliant exploration of the solubility of metal salts, and like Haber, she had converted from Judaism to Christianity before they married in 1901.
She was a brilliant physical chemist, truly an intellectual equal to Haber.
But she hit the absolute brick wall of societal expectations in Wilhelmine, Germany.
Her career was entirely derailed by her marriage. Haber was incredibly demanding, right?
Expecting her to manage the household and constantly host his colleagues, she was relegated to the role of a housewife.
Which triggered a deep and enduring depression. She felt her scientific potential was being totally wasted.
And beyond her personal despair over her career, she fundamentally opposed her husband's work in chemical warfare.
She was an outspoken pacifist. She viewed his militarization of chemistry as a complete perversion of the science they both loved.
Science was supposed to illuminate the world, not suffocate it in a trench.
Right. So after that horrific success at the Second Battle of Ypres, which resulted in over 67,000 casualties overall across the weeks of fighting, Fritz returns home to Berlin.
He is celebrating his promotion to captain, and he and Clara have an explosive argument.
The tragedy reaches its peak on the night of May 2nd, 1915.
Following their argument, Clara goes out into the garden of their villa in Dahlem.
She takes Fritz's military service revolver, the very symbol of his newfound military status, the weapon he was issued as a captain, and she shoots herself in the chest.
And she doesn't die instantly. In a deeply traumatic turn of events, the gunshot is heard by their 12-year-old son, Hermann,
who rushes out and finds his mother dying in the garden.
To have your brilliant wife take her own life with your military weapon in protest of your life's work and to be found by your own young son, it is an unimaginable trauma.
But Haber's reaction is chilling.
It really is. Within days of Clara's suicide, before she's even properly mourned, Haber literally packs his bags and leaves for the Eastern Front to oversee more gas attacks, this time against the Russian army.
It demonstrates a level of compartmentalization that is staggering, to literally pack your bags for the front lines days later.
Clara saw the ethical horror of what chemistry could do when stripped of humanity. Her suicide is widely interpreted by historians as the definitive, desperate protest against his work.
But Haber, just completely steadfast in his conviction that he belonged to his country, walled off his personal grief, left his traumatized son, and continued serving the state.
He does eventually remarry in 1917. He meets a woman named Charlotte Nathan.
Right. The story goes they met at the Adlon Hotel in Berlin. It was raining. She handed him an umbrella. They had a charming exchange, and they married.
They have 2 children, but that marriage also slowly deteriorates and ends in divorce by 1927. His personal life is just a landscape of fractured relationships.
And despite all of Haber's personal sacrifices, despite crossing every ethical line to provide Germany with chemical weapons, synthetic explosives, and strategic advantages, it is not enough.
World War I ends in a catastrophic defeat for Germany. The empire collapses.
The new Weimar Republic is burdened with crippling war reparations imposed by the Allies through the Treaty of Versailles.
And the German economy spirals into unprecedented hyperinflation.
Haber's patriotism hasn't faded, though. He embarks on a desperate, almost fantastical quest to single-handedly save his country's economy.
Between the wars, he is secretly helping Spain and Russia develop their own chemical weapons to bypass the restrictions of Versailles.
But his main focus is a project that sounds like pure alchemy, extracting dissolved gold from the ocean.
Right, because he solved the nitrogen crisis by pulling fertilizer from the air. He genuinely believed his intellect could solve anything.
He relied on older scientific estimates, specifically by the Swedish chemist Svante Arrhenius, which suggested there were about 6 milligrams of gold in every ton of seawater.
Haber calculated that if he could filter enough ocean water, he could extract enough gold to completely pay off Germany's national debt and restore the nation's glory.
He spends years in the 1920s exhaustively researching this. He outfits a secret laboratory on a Hamburg-America line ship.
They take thousands of water samples from oceans all over the globe. They run complex electrochemical extraction experiments.
Only to slowly, agonizingly realize that the prior research was entirely wrong.
Yet the concentration of gold dissolved in seawater was drastically lower than Arrhenius claimed.
It wasn't 6 milligrams per ton. It was closer to 0.0004 milligrams per ton, 1,000 times less.
The process was totally uneconomic. It would cost vastly more to power the extraction process than the microscopic flecks of gold were worth.
It's a rare, very public humiliation for his ego. The Gold from Seawater project is a failure.
But his institute at Dahlem remains a powerhouse. He oversees the Japan Fund, heavily supporting the work of other legendary scientists in Germany like Max Planck, Otto Hahn, and Leo Szilard.
Trying to keep German science afloat during economic ruin.
Crucially, during this interwar period, his institute pivots back to agricultural chemistry.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
They develop a cyanide-based gas formulation that is used as an insecticide, specifically as a fumigant to protect massive grain silos and ship holds from pests.
They call this insecticide Zyklon A.
Chemically, Zyklon A was methyl cyanoformate. It released hydrogen cyanide gas.
But because it was used around food stores and agricultural workers, it was formulated with a warning odor.
A chemical irritant like ethyl bromoacetate that would make your eyes water and burn.
That way, humans would know the deadly gas was present and flee the area before receiving a lethal dose. It was a safety feature.
It seems like a return to his early days, right? Using chemistry to protect the food supply.
He truly believed he was the indispensable German patriot. He had fed the nation, armed the nation, fought for the nation, and tried to pay off its debts.
He assumed his service rendered his Jewish heritage irrelevant. But the year 1933 would prove that to the German state, none of his accomplishments could overwrite his bloodline.
The Nazis rise to power. Almost immediately, they passed the law for the restoration of the professional civil service.
This law specifically targets Jewish professionals, banning them from government and academic positions.
The Nazis defined Jewishness by ancestry, by grandparents, not by religious practice. The fact that Haber converted to Lutheranism 40 years prior means absolutely nothing to them.
The betrayal is swift. Scientific journals that once lauded him as a national hero now publicly smear him.
They publish vicious articles calling him the Jew F. Haber.
He is stunned. As he noted to friends in his correspondence, he assumed his conversion to Christianity and his immense services during the Great War would protect him. He thought he was the exception.
He is ordered by the new Ministry of Education to dismiss all the Jewish personnel working under him at his institute.
And to his credit, he refuses.
He uses what little leverage he has left to delay their dismissals, aggressively working his international contacts to find his staff safe havens and academic posts outside of Germany.
And then, in April 1933, He writes a letter to the Minister of Education and resigns in protest.
In his resignation, he writes that although he might be legally entitled to remain in his position due to a temporary exemption for frontline war veterans, he no longer wishes to do so.
His health is rapidly failing. He suffers from severe angina, experiencing chest pains that indicate lasting damage to his heart.
He flees Germany, becoming a refugee from the very country he helped save.
He ends up in England for a brief time, taking a position at Cambridge.
But his legacy with chemical weapons heavily shadows him there. The British haven't forgotten the horrific chlorine gas attacks at Ypres.
The brilliant physicist Ernest Rutherford, the father of nuclear physics, pointedly refuses to even shake Haber's hand when they cross paths.
He is shunned by many in the British scientific community.
Seeking a new home and a place where his expertise might still be valued, he receives an offer from Chaim Weizmann,
A prominent Zionist leader and chemist who would later become the first president of Israel.
Weizmann offers Haber the directorship of the Seif Research Institute in Mandatory Palestine, which we now know as the Weizmann Institute.
Haber accepts the offer and leaves for the Middle East in January 1934.
But his heart just can't take the physical and emotional strain.
Mid-journey, he stops to rest at a hotel in Basel, Switzerland. On January 29, 1934, Fritz Haber dies of heart failure at the age of 65.
He dies literally in transit, in a hotel room, caught between a country that totally betrayed him and a homeland he never reached.
It is a stunningly lonely end for a man who changed the whole globe.
His longtime friend Albert Einstein, who had sharply criticized Haber's militarism, but always recognized his genius and his humanity, delivered a profound eulogy.
Einstein wrote, "Haber's life was the tragedy of the German Jew, the tragedy of unrequited love."
It perfectly encapsulates his existence. Haber gave his soul, his morals, his family, and his unparalleled genius to Germany. And Germany discarded him the absolute moment the political winds shifted.
But his death in 1934 was not the end of his story. His darkest legacy was still yet to come.
Remember the agricultural insecticide developed by Haber's Institute in the 1920s, Zyklon A.
Yeah.
Years after Haber's death, scientists working under the Nazi regime take the formulation of Zyklon A and they modify it.
They specifically remove the chemical warning odor, the irritant designed to protect human life.
They absorb the hydrogen cyanide into porous pellets like diatomaceous earth or wood pulp.
They create Zyklon B.
Zyklon B becomes the primary chemical agent used in the gas chambers of the extermination camps during the Holocaust.
It was used to systematically murder over 1 million Jews and other victims of the Nazi regime.
The scale of the irony is horrifying.
It's hard to even process. You can't just separate the science from the scientist or the invention from the application. Once the genie is out of the bottle, you have no control over who makes the wishes.
The man who tried to escape his Jewish heritage, who compromised his ethics to build chemical weapons for the German war machine, inadvertently provided that exact same machine with the very tool they use to exterminate his own people.
And the horror touched his family directly.
Among those murdered in the concentration camps using the gas developed from his institute's research were members of Haber's own extended family.
His half-sister Frieda's daughter, her husband, and their 2 children were all killed in the camps.
The generational trauma of his legacy continued to ravage his descendants.
His son, Hermann, the boy who found Clara after her suicide, eventually immigrates to the United States to escape the war.
But the weight of his family's legacy, the compounding trauma, is too much. Hermann takes his own life in 1946.
And then, Hermann's oldest daughter, Claire, who was also a brilliant chemist working on antidotes to chlorine gas, commits suicide in 1949 after her own scientific research is sidelined.
It is a dark, sprawling shadow cast over an entire family line. You look at the entirety of his life, and it demands that we confront the fundamental ambiguity of ethics in science.
The sheer whiplash of Fritz Haber's life is staggering.
He's the savior of billions, literally pulling the fertilizer that feeds half the planet out of the air using heat and pressure.
And he is the architect of mass death, pioneering trench warfare and laying the chemical groundwork for the Holocaust.
He is a man who was ultimately destroyed by the very nation he compromised his deepest morals to protect.
We often look at modern innovators, right? The people building artificial intelligence, pioneering gene editing tools, or writing the algorithms that dictate our global communication.
We tend to assume that the pursuit of efficiency will naturally lead to human flourishing.
But the life of Fritz Haber demands that we ask a harder question. When we invent tools that rewrite the fundamental rules of nature, are we absolutely sure we know who will be holding the controls a decade from now?
The nitrogen that feeds us is the exact same element in the explosives that destroy us. The pursuit of total efficiency, stripped of humanity, is a terrifying thing.
We want the world to be clean, binary, good or evil. But the legacy of Fritz Haber proves that human invention is undeniably murky. The tool is neutral. The tragedy and the triumph is entirely human. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.